if the laundry bin is full, you got to go do your laundry. You can't keep filling the hamper and it's going to overflow and you can't use your hamper anymore. So you got to go do the laundry to use the hamper again. Same thing with our minds. You have to let go. You have to forgive in order to then have the capacity to receive more and move forward more.
I'm Jamie Mo Crazy, and you're listening to Life Gets Mo Crazy, where we'll hear from people who either been through a trauma or helped someone else through it. Listen and learn strategies you can implement in your life, so when a metaphorical avalanche slides you down the mountain of life, you can climb an alternative peak with the best view. I'm here today with Rheaume, and she is a brain injury survivor and an artist and an advocate and a public speaker. So it's going to be such a good conversation to talk about how she recovered from when her life changed in the blink of an eye with her traumatic brain injuries, 2 of them, and then how she built herself back to be who she is today. So Allie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to get into conversation with you.
Yeah, it'll be lots of fun. So to start out with, let's talk about when your life changed in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, so in February of 2016, I was accidentally struck in the face by a steel commercial door. Prior to that, I was an elementary school PE teacher. I was a kids ministry director, a high school coach, a stand-up paddleboard instructor, a Zumba instructor. I had a super active teaching, coaching lifestyle. And then when I was accidentally struck in the face by that door, I went to the ER. They said, oh, you have a concussion. You'll be fine in a couple of days. I wasn't. I don't remember much, but I do remember feeling super tired, just wanting to sleep. I went to bed. I woke up a completely different person. My processing was slow. My speech was stuttered. I couldn't even hold my head up myself. I had really bad headaches, dizziness, imbalance. I mean, everything opposite of what a PE teacher would need and be like, right? I went through a lot of rehab in 2016 and was working on getting better and better, slowly progressing, not huge gains, but a little bit. I stayed out of work for the whole rest of that school year, the whole summer. And then I tried to go back to work teaching in the fall of 2016. And it wasn't going so great for me. It was really overstimulating and loud. And I found myself with a lot of difficulty in processing. And then unfortunately, I sustained an additional TBI, again, accidentally from a shelf, and sustained another concussion. I also had a medication reaction at the same time as that. And I ended up in the hospital at a 10% functioning level.
Wow. And you mentioned after your first TBI, you stayed out of work and you did some rehabilitation, but was this funded by your insurance company? Was this independent rehabilitation? Like, how did that work? Because you also mentioned that when you went to get your first traumatic brain injury checked out, you were told that you were fine. And how did that work?
Yeah, so in the ER, they didn't do any scans or anything like that. They, again, said, you have a concussion, go home, you should be fine in a couple of days. And that care through all the beginning of 2016 was all actually workers' comp, because the injury that happened was at one of the jobs that I had.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure because it sounded like you weren't diagnosed that it needed care.
Right. And that can be such a tricky thing to navigate. I actually love to encourage anyone anyway that the injury they sustained, if it was through workers' comp or any type of, there's anything legality inside of it, to move forward from it and try to settle the case, because I know when they had a hand over my care, it really was not the best care. And it took forever to get approved for things. and get reimbursed. And it added so much stress onto trying to get better. I think it prolonged getting better, honestly. And to the point where when I sustained that second TBI and I ended up in the hospital at a 10% function level, then I needed to have inpatient rehab and home care and all this stuff, where I got an attorney and we said, no workers' comp right now. This is all going to be covered by the other insurance I had. And I started to get better approved care.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of individuals can actually find more ways to access financial care through different grants and things like that. Like there's an organization called High Fives, which if you get injured in the outdoors and you're trying to get back to the outdoors, they cover your rehabilitation and beyond what insurance covers. So like I went to psychotherapy with them, which is surprising to me that insurance at that time, my accident was 9 years ago, just about 9 years ago. And we know that one of the biggest deficits that develops after a brain injury is emotional instability. And the fact that psychotherapy is not covered by insurance is mind blowing.
Right. Oh my gosh.
But there are organizations out there. So if you look for ways to get your own resource facilitation, because that's one of the things that's tricky, is that there's not really a roadmap that people can necessarily help you through.
That's so true. And rehabilitation from brain injury is so individualized that there is no one standard of care for everyone. Like there are various practitioners that people tend to go to for help, like PT, OT, speech, neurology, psychology, right? Those are all pretty common, maybe like neurooptometry. But not everybody needs the same amount of appointments with the same providers and so forth. So it is extremely individualized. And so knowing to navigate that is a lot. It's great when you know yourself and you can navigate that. But I always feel like too, sustaining a brain injury and trying to navigate the cognition of rehab and getting it covered with insurance and who do I see where and when, that can be really tricky as well.
Yeah. And especially if someone has as critical of a brain injury as I did, I was not in charge of myself. I was not a legal adult. I could not drive a car. And so I could not make a single decision that happened to me. And so many people have mentioned, you're so lucky your mom had so much education, because my mom had a master's in psychology and had studied early childhood brain development at Columbia in New York City and had all this education on ways to rebuild your synaptic connections and rewire your brain. And so she used that on me. But that's one of the reasons why we created Mo Crazy Strong Foundation, is because everybody doesn't have a support system that is going to be so educated and strong about them. And as you mentioned, they can't do it for themselves quite often. And it takes years to be able to do it. And then you're already past the stages and you look back on it and you're like, oh, I wish I knew that years ago.
It's so true. Because also when I was laying in a hospital bed inpatient and like needing to go to rehab, and even when I was in rehab and all those things, I would say the same thing. I mean, I was the individual in the family that had a, bachelor's in movement science and a master's degree in health and PE and everything. So I was the one with the knowledge, the main knowledge of the body and what's going on. But yet I was the one in the hospital bed, not capable of communicating. Yeah. I was nonverbal. Decision-making was not in my realm either. And so I know my family did their best with what they were told. That can be really challenging. Depends what the doctors are saying. The family is just like, I don't know. So it's great that you had your mom being so knowledgeable to help you.
Yeah, it was very fortunate. And that's why we've established the Mo Crazy method and everything else that we do. Because it is fortunate you at least had family members. There are many people who go through brain injury that the family either is not part of their life or is not supportive, or understanding, especially when you get to the stages where it's invisible. So in some situations, that's from the beginning, it's invisible struggles, and sometimes it's during the recovery process, but everybody goes through cognition, and emotional deficits that are invisible struggles that you have to deal with. And so you're not who the rest of your family or the people around you think that you used to be, and they don't understand that you are working through struggles.
Right. I often say they don't get it because they don't have it, and I don't want them to have it. So I need to give them grace if they don't get it. Like, I know I am super grateful to have my family and some great friends who try really hard to understand. But Jamie, you're right. It is an invisible injury. And even if I have, say, a mobility aid, if people don't say like, wow, you still don't see the brain injury. You still don't see, there's no cast. There's nothing that's saying, oh, this is why this human is using a device, or maybe is a little slow checking in at an appointment or something. It is invisible. And so educating the best that we can on this aspect of an invisible injury is so important.
Yeah, that's why I use the analogy of when you're walking to work. If you slip and fall on the ice and you break your arm, you're not going to go to work with your arm jutting out. You're going to go to the doctor, you're going to get it checked out, and the doctor is going to be able to tell you, okay, you need to put a cast on. You have this amount of time. It's very concrete what you have for your recovery from a broken arm. However, if you slip and you fall on the ice and you hit your head, you'll probably go to work. And then if you behave slower or respond irrationally, and it starts going downward, and there's a big downward spiral that all traces back to that brain injury that you acquired that you didn't even get diagnosed. And there are so many millions of Americans that actually deal with this challenge, because acquired brain injury is our largest disability. And most people don't know that. And they're like shocked and surprised, because a lot of times the disabilities that develop and the deficits that you can get through, but only if given the opportunities for rehabilitation and to rewire your brain and get through that. And if people don't understand you have something to get through, they're not going to allow you to get through it.
Exactly. Well said, Jamie. And honestly, that's why I'm so passionate to do the advocacy work that I do now, because I always say as well that complaining is talking without resolution. But in order to solve problems and make change and make this all better for any of us sustaining brain injury and trying to heal from that, there needs to be more of an awareness and education. And so if you face a barrier, something that is sort of, that's a strong feeling, something you're passionate about because it didn't go well for your own recovery, and I'm saying you as in anyone listening, there's opportunities to get involved to help make the change to go forward. Because otherwise, if we all sit in our own residence and only complain, but we don't speak out to make change, the change won't happen. So, whether it's your town's disability commission and saying, hey, you know what? We have a disability commission. Let me go talk to them about the brain injury, the cognitive piece too. Because I think a lot of times people hear disability, they think physical disability, and that is part of it. And I know I do still face some mobility challenges. So I'm happy to advocate for that in my town too, for access to things. But there's also opportunity for something like, example, our town farmers market. There could be more cognitive support there. Maybe they're great at using signage, but maybe they help with a sensory friendly hour for the first hour of the farmers market, and then the rest of it they get the band to play music, right? So just speaking up and saying, hey, how can we help make this world a more accessible place, not just physically, but also cognitively for those of us who are struggling with things that you may not see?
That was so good. And And so that brings us right to, what are you doing for your advocacy work?
A lot of different things. So I am on my town's disability commission to have a voice there. I also attend, honestly, any meeting I can possibly get my hands on and have capacity for. So whether it's a town council meeting where I live, or even like I've been to like economic subcommittee development meetings, because they could be talking about funding plowing sidewalks in the town, and I can have a voice in there for disability and advocacy. Like they had a recent discussion and said, well, when should the snow be cleared? Should there be an amount of time, or what streets, what sidewalks? And I spoke up and said every sidewalk, because you don't know if your neighbor needs that cleared in order to get to, say, the train station, right? So attending all these different meetings in my town, as well as the state. I live in Massachusetts, so in New England with you. And there's meetings all the time, say for our public transportation, for our trains and everything, and showing up to those meetings when they're open to the public and putting an advocacy voice forward. So showing up in all those kinds of spaces. And then I also serve on the state's brain injury council, which is full of both brain injury survivors and professionals and community partners. So that's great to collaborate with everyone. And we're trying to get more education out there and support and collaborate more with each other across the state versus all these independent resources. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, I volunteer my time to host an in-person monthly meetup for anyone who navigates life with disability, in addition, beyond brain injury too. So it can be brain injury or anything else. And I host a virtual monthly support group for individuals who have sustained concussions.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you're very busy. And something you pointed out was that it seems like everything is kind of fragmented. Like there are so many amazing opportunities that are developing with brain injury. It's actually pretty phenomenal how much brain injury recovery and rehabilitation has changed in the past decade. Yes. The understanding of neuroplasticity, and that your brain has plasticity beyond just the cortical stages of development or the first 2 years post-accident, but it can continue to develop for years and years, and you can rewire your brain by setting these habits. Mm-hmm. And the amount of time it takes to set habits. My injury recovery from my critical brain injury was seen as extremely successful. And it took a good 5 years to really get comfortable with some of the cognition that was happening in my brain. And it took a long time for me to be able to stabilize my emotions. So even when you have what's seen stereotypically from the outside as a very successful recovery, and I do think it was very successful, it takes a long time, which is one of the big things that's also different from breaking your arm is you'll say, okay, 6 weeks, or like you tear your ACL and they're like, okay, you're going to have 8 months of no full movement until you get back. But for a brain injury, it's multiple years recovery in a lot of situations. And so when people are recovering, since it is kind of fragmented from either from the different areas in the state or state to state, like the fact Massachusetts is actually a really good state for brain injury. I actually spend time in Connecticut. I have and then also Utah, and I'm the chair of the Utah Brain Injury Council. And Utah has phenomenal brain injury work that's happening and being done. But a lot of the states surrounding Utah have to go to Utah for their care. They don't have any federal support for their rehabilitation. There's just such a vast difference from where you're located to the recovery you will receive and the opportunities you have post your acute care recovery. And by acute care, that means just the quick time from the traumatic brain injury. So the acute care for my traumatic brain injury recovery was when I was in the hospital, and maybe even starting my outpatient therapy might still be considered acute care. But what about the years of therapy I did beyond that and recovery beyond that to get back to being the adult that I am today? That's often ignored, not given the opportunities. And some situations like Utah has a traumatic brain injury fund. So I could go to 5 days of outpatient therapy until I graduated from the therapy. I wasn't cut off. Most people, their insurance companies will cut them off after about 30 sessions, regardless of whether they're improving or not. But if your state has a traumatic brain injury fund, it can step in and cover those expenses so you can continue to heal. So now I can contribute back to society and not live off of disability help. However, in many cases, it's not even an option to have that be, well, maybe I could go there. No, it's not, because they don't have traumatic brain injury funds, and it's just too fragmented. The care is just way too different.
It is. And like you said, within our own states, but also surrounding states, they're different. It's different everywhere. And I see that too, because the virtual support group I facilitate is actually global. And I've learned, even just from being on social media, I've learned so much about how even in the UK, it's different than the US. And it can be really tough to, honestly, I feel very blessed to be in Massachusetts and to have gotten care that I have. And sometimes I forget that, like you just said, Jamie, some states don't even have that care. So my hope is that what we're doing here in Massachusetts with trying to collaborate more and make this more of a streamlined community of care, that expands elsewhere, because everywhere any person lives deserves to have the proper support, and not only the knowledge, but also the hope. Because if providers are saying, you sustained a brain injury, good luck, or you're going to be like that forever, or if they don't even have the right mindset or resources for themselves, it can be really hard to transfer that to the patient and the family. And then therefore people are left kind of hopeless. So I am really, really excited, I will say, for the future, because I do see that this can come together more, and I really hope it does.
Yes. And what you just mentioned was medical staff putting ceilings onto people's recovery process by looking at statistics and numbers. And you can't do that because, as you mentioned, every brain injury is different. However, there are different protocols and avenues that have been shown to help on a repetitive basis. One of those is when I went into the hospital, they were actually under the belief that for critical brain injuries, it needed to keep the brain at complete rest. So they wouldn't let the family in the room. They wouldn't talk to the patient. They wouldn't play any music. They just wanted complete rest. And now they're realizing that that actually is much worse. And they actually have changed protocol at the hospital that I was treated at. And the doctor who's in charge of my neuro care is interviewed in our documentary that did the film festival run and won multiple awards on brain injury recovery, called #MoCrazyStrong. And he's interviewed saying that they believed this one idea, and then my family didn't listen. They were there, they were stroking me, petting me, playing music. They were doing all these types of things. And now there's been more research that has been done in the US and Canada, and it is scientifically proven that there's different forms of exciting the brain. Obviously, if you took someone to a rock concert or you overstimulate it, that's bad. However, if they have a certain amount of stimulation because their mom walks into the room and their heartbeat picks up, which happened. My mom walked into the room and my heartbeat picked up and my brain started picking up a little bit, that actually is okay and helps you come out of the coma and regain all forms of your cognition by allowing your brain to excite a little bit. So we are learning so many things that we can use to help improve more outcomes. And definitely one of the things is raising awareness to the medical professional community that you can have a recovery. My older sister went to Georgetown Medical School 20 years ago, and she was taught that after 2 years, the deficits are permanent. And if you tell the individual that, they're going to believe you. The family's going to believe you. They're going to be making your prediction come true because you put a ceiling on them. So we need to get rid of that. And there's so many doctors who still even tell me, like some of them, like the doctor in our film is super groundbreaking. He has an amazing growth mindset. But so many of them say, well, you're just a miraculous story. Like other individuals can't have your story. And I'm like, that's not true. We've helped hundreds of individuals surpass the expectations and have miraculous stories because they don't believe they can't. They believe they can have a miraculous story.
Oh, Jamie, I love your heart and your passion. And this is exactly what we need and exactly why it's important to do these things, right? Have podcasts out there, using social media, speaking at conferences. That's another thing that I love to do is to keep educating, and having the survivor story along with the research. Because you were just talking about coma and stimulation and everything. And, it's that way even for concussion. Back in 2016, I was told, same thing where I think they just put it all in one big jar. It was like any brain injury, just be quiet and sit in darkness. And that was told for concussion too. But thankfully, the concussion consensus, which is now updated from what year are we in? We're in 2024, not last year, the year before. Oh my goodness. And it now says the opposite. Like you said, don't go to a rock concert the day after sustaining a concussion, but it's okay to get outside, right? You don't have to be in your house with the shades drawn and not talking to a single human, because that actually makes it worse. And there is no cap for how long it can take to get better. People can always improve the neuroplasticity. Concussions themselves are functional injuries. So that means they can get better, honestly, at any point. It could be 50 years and someone could still get better from a concussion.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, getting outside is a tremendous thing to do. Because when you have a concussion, if you're going for a walk outside, the nature, there's so much nature therapy. And also walking stimulates the blood flow, which goes up to your brain and it brings oxygen to your brain, which helps you rebuild your synaptic connections. So if you're just sitting there and you're in the dark and you're not doing anything, then your brain is not actually healing at all. So you're right.
And more likely to lead to depression as well.
Yes. And speaking of depression, with a brain injury, many people go through depression stages because their brain is affected. Like it's damaged to their brain. And then also because of the change in their lifestyle. And so one of the things that I always talk about is that your life has changed. And that's true. Like when you have a baby, your life has changed. There's other points in your life where your life has changed. And in most situations, when you have a brain injury, your life has changed. And so instead of trying to get back to exactly the life you lived before, the opportunities, the ability level you had before, you can build a new life. And that's something that you have done, which is how you went from being a PE teacher to winning an award as an artist. So let's talk about that.
Oh, it is so true. And this is something I love helping people with, is realizing that after sustaining a brain injury, you do still have gifts inside of you, because we're all born naturally with certain gifts, right? If you put 10 people in the room and asked every single person to go cook, some people are going to be great at it and some people are going to be not so great at it, right? I think there's like an innate creativity there and a passion for it. If you have someone go do something with technology, right? All these different things. We each have gifts inside of us that lead us to the jobs that we do. we're not just making money, we're using our gifts in the jobs that we do. And so sustaining a brain injury, I was like, oh my goodness, there's no way I'm going back to a gymnasium with 20 to 40, kindergarten through third grade children. That just was so overwhelming to even think about. But I was like, well, what I stopped and I thought was, what are the gifts that I have that God gave me, that I was born with, that led me to be a PE teacher or any of the other jobs? And as I said at the very beginning, I realized they were all teaching and coaching based jobs. And that has been something my entire life. I've always had a passion for teaching, and then it got into coaching as well, pretty similar. So I took that, and in addition to creativity. Before brain injury, creativity for me was lesson plans, posters for the gym, bulletin boards. And then after brain injury, I translated all of that, the gift of teaching, the gift of creativity that I have with artistic ability. And I started, speaking again and doing support groups and stuff. And that's how I've used my teaching and with social media. And then I also transferred the creativity to sitting down and experimenting with painting for the first time ever in my life. And it led me to become an award-winning artist who also now owns her own art business, which blows my mind. But it's possible. Anyone can transition. It takes a lot of mindset and a lot of effort and trial and error and willing to make mistakes and put yourself out there. But you have gifts and you just need to find a new way to use them.
Yeah. And you mentioned mindset. What are 3 strategies for embracing a growth mindset when you're trying to make this change?
Ooh, okay. I would say 1 would be letting go. Because if your hands are full of things that you're holding on to mentally and emotionally because they hurt you in the past, then your hands can never be open to receive what's in the future. So 1 is letting go. 2, I would say, is forgiveness. And that sort of goes with letting go, where things in the past have hurt us. It could have been from a person or a circumstance. And the longer we let that thing have control in our lives, then the less likely we are going to be able to have capacity to move forward. I kind of refer to it as, if the laundry bin is full, you got to go do your laundry. You can't keep filling the hamper and it's going to overflow and you can't use your hamper anymore. So you got to go do the laundry to use the hamper again. Same thing with our minds. You have to let go. You have to forgive in order to then have the capacity to receive more and move forward more. And then the third one for letting go, I would say, is reframing. So taking challenging thoughts or circumstances that come our way and being real about recognizing how that feels emotionally, like not skipping over that part, being honest about how you feel, and then reframing it to say, well, what did that teach me? What did I learn from it? How can I grow from it? How can that actually make me a better person? And a reframe could be as simple as, let's see, the other day, I had one. What was it? Oh, I was laughing so hard. I was writing on my whiteboard and my marker started running out. And I could have gotten, this is a simple example, I could have gotten so frustrated and been like, oh, this looks terrible. My marker ran out. And then I was like, I'm going to reframe that. It's just an ombre effect. It went from really dark black to really light at the end. And it's beautiful. Like, it sounds silly, but those little practices of reframing instead of being upset at how my whiteboard looked help us in the bigger things too. So reframing, forgiving, and letting go.
Amazing. Because as you know, having a growth mindset is so important in recovery from a brain injury, and really just living life in general. One of the big things that you mentioned about reframing, that goes for anybody who's lived anything in life. You can either be your harshest critic or your biggest advocate. And we all tend to sometimes be our harshest critics, but we need to see if we are really upset that we think we failed at something, what did we learn from it? How did it grow? How can you change it? What made me think of that was my husband and I have been reconstructing our house for the last couple of years, and completely from like rewiring the electricity, subfloors, like doing the whole thing. And you can always look at like little things that you're going to be the only person to notice, and you can think of them as being bad, or you can change them into being good. So reframing
Exactly.
is important.
Exactly. I like that example too, because it reminds us that those changes and challenges can be opportunity for change. I should say those challenges can be opportunity for change. I tell myself that too when with reframing. Say the other day, a couple of weeks ago, we had a really, really bad storm here in Massachusetts, and it was flooded everywhere, trees down everywhere. And this is rare. This isn't common for Massachusetts. And I was trying to get to an appointment. I ended up being an hour late, but while we were on the road and we actually got stuck behind, something had just happened. I think a tree fell across the road and maybe onto a car. I just kept telling myself, okay, yes, I feel frustrated that I'm late to my appointment, but I am safe. I am so grateful that my driver is being safe. And I'm grateful that I'm not the person who just got a tree that fell on their car. And I would pray for them. And I feel bad for what just happened to them. I also have to reframe that for myself, because I could have easily been, because I'm not able to drive yet, so I get transportation. I could have been sitting in the back seat, just livid and like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get to my appointment. This is terrible. But nope. Take a breath, reframe it. And also I never know what God's hand is on and why. Like if we weren't late, we could have been that 5 cars in front of us that the tree fell on instead. And so reminding myself, I never know the why behind things. I'm just going to do my best with what's put on my plate every day.
Yeah, that's great. And that brings us to one of the things that brain injury survivors do a lot of is when they're blaming themselves and like, why did this happen to me? And the thing is that we all have to remember things happen to everybody. Yes, the traumatic brain injury or any form of acquired brain injury caused our life to change quite often in the blink of an eye. And it's really dramatic, really depressing. You have a lot of struggles to go through. You have to work on your emotional stability. You have a big journey ahead of you. But there's all sorts of different types of journeys. And because you forgot something, well, guess what? Every human being forgets things. Mm-hmm. And if you're late to something, like you were saying, like it had nothing to do with you. It's out of your control. And sometimes that's scary when things go wrong out of our control. But things go wrong for everybody. And so just reframe your challenging situations to see how you can grow from them.
Exactly. And something that has helped me too, that I actually heard on another podcast before, was asking yourself, like, what's the chair behind the way that you feel right now? Like take a moment to recognize why you feel the way you do, because like in a particular situation. So say if it was the brain injury and I'm like, why not only do I feel frustrated or sad or whatnot, and those are valid, I'm going to let myself feel those things and not shove them down, because that's not healthy either. But then ask myself, why do I feel that? And then it leads to something like, oh, the 2 chairs behind me is actually fear of my future. And then how can I let that go? Oh, I need to trust God that he has something new for me. Like, so it's this process of asking yourself what's behind what you're feeling. And I have found that really helps me to release and trust. I've got to trust that there is a plan for my life going forward. And change can be difficult for anyone, any human being. We all wake up a different person every day. None of us go to bed and wake up the next day the same exact person we were the day before. Every day that we have is different. And sometimes change is just on a bigger scale. And I think sometimes with brain injury, it can be hard to accept as well, because we didn't choose the change. And it feels like somebody did it to us. And the truth is, it wasn't most likely an accident that happened unless something purposeful occurred. And we, again, can't even control that person or the circumstance. Our job is to recognize the past, allow ourselves to feel, let it go and trust that our future has something more.
Amazing. And so if my audience wants to get in touch with you, you mentioned social media and things like that. What are the best ways to get in touch with you?
I would say the number one way would be Instagram DMs. My Instagram is at Allison with one L .Rheaume, Rheaume. And the other, I mean, you email too, I guess, but I would definitely see Instagram DMs the most, and Instagram more than Facebook. But I'm on not all socials. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I have email. I have a website. So I'm kind of everywhere.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining. I got so excited. And I think that our audience is definitely going to take away some steps that they can use when they're climbing their alternative peaks.
Awesome. Well, I'm cheering everyone on, including you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to listen to Life Gets Mo Crazy. I hope you learned some new ways to recover from struggle and climb an alternative peak by listening to this episode. If you loved it, please subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. If you would like to follow me, Jamie Mo Crazy, you can find me on all social media platforms at Jamie Mo Crazy or hashtag Mo Crazy Strong. Each episode is the last Friday of every month, so go be Mo Crazy Strong until our next episode.